I would recommend that the United States should focus aid to Mozambique. Mozambique has a largely agrarian economy and as a result is prone to instability in its economy and price changes. However, the Philippines economy is more stable as it has multiple products and sectors that it exports from. In the Philippines, diversification has played a large role in the economic development of the Philippines. The Philippines has recently expanded into markets beyond those they are heavily reliant on, such as agriculture and technology, reducing the dependence on markets that suffer from high volatility, bolstering the economy, and reducing susceptibility to market shocks. Some of the industries the Philippines has expanded to have been business processes outsourcing and tourism, creating a large number of jobs and increasing foreign investment in the Filipino economy. Furthermore, the diversification of the Filipino economy has spurred innovation and technological advancement, increasing productivity and global competitiveness for the Philippines. Additionally, the Philippines has begun diversifying the natural resources they make use of, which has skyrocketed the renewable energy industry and boosted mining. The diversification efforts by the Philippines have brought in more foreign direct investment. Through diversification efforts, the Philippines has been able to build a more balanced economy that is no longer reliant on a single sector, reducing susceptibility to economic downfall. This diversification also provides greater opportunities to previously unused regions of the nation, driving growth and development nationwide and building up a flourishing future. So, as you can see, the Philippines is already relatively stable and already has been improving their government. But Mozambique, however, needs the aid in order to improve the infrastructure it has, the education, and other efforts that support an economy. So Philippines already has that groundwork, but Mozambique requires some additional aid, um, which I'll explain now. In Mozambique, diversification will enable the country to reduce its reliance on its primary sectors of agriculture and mining. The problem is that Mozambique does not have the proper aid to accomplish this. Diversification efforts will lead to the creation of more resilient futures in industries such as tourism and manufacturing, opening up many employment opportunities within Mozambique. Diversification will also bring in more income for Mozambique as they are now able to rapidly grow new industries. And this income can go towards poverty alleviation and investment into renewable energy sources such as solar energy and hydro energy. Furthermore, diversification efforts in Mozambique have opened up new opportunities for trade and regional integration, allowing for enterprises to be built that enable entrepreneurship. Diversification in Mozambique also aided in mitigating climate change risks by establishing sustainable practices in agriculture and mining. Through diversification, Mozambique has reduced its dependence on its main primary sectors, driving the country to adopt new industries and practices to further economic growth and prosperity for the future. Thus, it is important for Mozambique to diversify its economy and no longer remain dependent upon its agricultural area of the economy. And this diversification can be accomplished through education, and funding for that education is required. Mozambique currently has very low education standards. 61% of the boys and 55% of girls are educated in primary school. Education is mostly free, but there is a lack of school availability, meaning that not a lot of children are had the access to go to school. This is not in walking distance, and there's also a high teacher to student ratio, which again, there's a high student to teacher ratio, which again means that the students aren't as capable of learning because there's not as many resources to help foster the learning environments. This means that less of the workforce is educated and are working in agricultural areas. Education is the foundation for the economy and the economic society. So, and in order to have a more developed country and to expand out of the agricultural sector and into more of the technological sectors and things of that sort, education is required. And again, in terms of lack of education, a lot of the kids are encouraged to just stay at home and work on the farm and work on the agricultural plots because that is what that is a surefire way to provide money for the family and to help support the family income. So again, that's another reason why children in Mozambique are not encouraged to go to school. So, in order to remain diverse and have a stable economy, Mozambique must branch out and develop their other sectors. And this is done through the education of the workforce. The Philippines already has a greater rate of education than Mozambique, and as a result, has a more developed technological sector and more developed other sectors as well of the economy. Thus, Mozambique should grow its education sector and enable a future workforce to work in more stable areas. Now, some problems that may arise from this Mozambique carrying out this aid and putting the aid to good use is the corruption inside Mozambique. The government of Mozambique is not very stable, and this is because the government had to overcome a decades-long civil war, and this leads to the central government um, also having problems like corruption because there is no central authority that can stamp out these problems. Um, However, the Philippines government is relatively stable, and although there is some corruption, it's not as extensive as Mozambique. Um, so although Philippines may be able to better use the money, I think that Mozambique still requires the aid to help improve the education system. Mozambique has a mixed economy system as well as the Philippines. So again, this means that the government has a direct involvement, which means that the government can put the aid to education into place. The Mozambique has commercially important deposits of coal and such as and also graphite, iron ore, and titanium. And Mozambique has one of the largest untapped coal reserves in the world, while the Philippines has timber, petroleum, nickel, cobalt, silver, gold, salt, and copper. So these resources are what is primarily making Mozambique um, are pretty much untapped, and these this is because Mozambique does not have manufacturing. So again, Mozambique has those diversification efforts. They can greatly grow their economy through the use of manufacturing. Um, and Mozambique has implemented reforms to improve access and quality of education. These initiatives are Education for All, which has focused on increasing enrollment rates and reducing dropout rates and having made education more accessible. The government has also created new initiatives to improve healthcare and decrease death rates. So give funding to these if we give funding to these programs such as Education for All through the use of government aid, then Mozambique can again improve its education system. So using these organizations may be vital to helping improve the economy of Mozambique. So that's the answer to question one, and now I'll pass it over to Rizvik, who will answer question two.
Based on the current trends and information we have, the Philippines has a higher likelihood of experiencing significant economic growth compared to the Mozambique. Its economy has consistently demonstrated the capability of being good, driven by key sectors such as tourism. The government's infrastructure program, known as Build, 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 aims to address long-standing infrastructure gaps, which have negatively affected economic development in the past. Through investments in transportation, energy, water resources, and urban development, the Philippines aims to enhance productivity, attract more investments, and foster sustainable economic growth. Moreover, the country's strategic location in Southeast Asia, coupled with its skilled English-speaking workforce, positions it favorably as a hub for regional trade and investment. Furthermore, the Philippines has been successful in attracting foreign direct investment, particularly in the services sector. Its business-friendly policies, incentives for investors, and relatively stable political environment have contributed to its appeal as an investment destination. The government's efforts to promote ease of doing business and streamline regulatory processes have also been instrumental in attracting foreign direct investment inflows. The Philippines has consistently maintained a robust GDP growth rate over the past decade, reflecting its resilience and potential for economic expansion. While exact figures vary annually, the Philippines has generally outpaced global GDP growth rates by its diversified economy and strategic focus on sectors such as services, manufacturing, and agriculture, like I said before. Additionally, government initiatives aimed at infrastructure development and attracting foreign investment have contributed to sustained GDP growth. And since we just talked about Philippines and how it has capabilities of becoming a good economy and growing, we can talk about Mozambique, who really doesn't have a chance to grow that much because Mozambique presents a different economic landscape characterized by vast natural resources, including coal, natural gas, and minerals. Even though they have these resources, significant potential for driving economic growth through export revenues and domestic industrialization in Mozambique faces various challenges that could impede its trajectory. Political instability, governance issues, and security concerns have deterred some investors from fully capitalizing on the country's resource wealth. Additionally, weak infrastructure, really weak infrastructure, the lack of roads, hospitals, telecommunications, all have limited access to basic services and hinder productivity and economic diversification efforts. Mozambique's GDP growth trajectory has been more volatile, influenced by factors such as political instability, commodity prices, and infrastructure constraints. While the discovery of significant natural gas reserve presents opportunities for economic diversification and growth, challenges such as governance issues and security concerns have hindered progress. Furthermore, Mozambique faces significant income inequality as it is clearly seen by its really high Gini coefficient.
In Mozambique, the area of development we have chosen is education. Through investment in education, Mozambique can better equip its citizens with the skills necessary to succeed in the workforce. Currently, nearly 50% of girls drop out of school by 5th grade, with most Mozambican children being able to read or write at a 3rd grade level. If Mozambique were to invest in educational services, this would allow for more participation in the workforce and increase competitiveness both domestically and internationally. Better education will also allow Mozambique to find innovations in sectors they specialize in, which adds to competitiveness as Mozambique will pioneer new products and services on the global scale. Furthermore, Mozambique currently has one of the highest rates of poverty in the world, with the poverty rate being over 60% as of 2014. Per World Bank, every extra year of schooling reduces the likelihood of suffering impoverishment by nearly 10%. Thus, increased educational services will reduce the percentage of Mozambique's population facing poverty and improve quality of life, as families will have greater economic freedom through having access to higher level jobs. Despite these ideas, Mozambique currently suffers from many issues that inhibit access to education that must be solved first. To begin, rural areas currently have limited access due to minimal infrastructure presence, which means that very few students have access to educational services, and those who do often drop out at an early age. Just 4.4% of Mozambique's GDP is allocated towards educational services, according to UNESCO. This lack of investment has hampered Mozambique's ability to find quality educators and has forced a lack of educational material. To solve this, Mozambique should also focus on funding infrastructure improvements to build more schools, especially in rural areas where educational services are limited to make access to education more equitable. Mozambique should also focus on improving educational services overall, creating training programs and special curricula to maximize the quality of education received by Mozambican students. Finally, Mozambique should create vocational training that allows older citizens to gain training for certain occupations, opening up opportunities to make a living and find their way out of poverty. In the Philippines, the area of development that we have chosen is infrastructure. We believe this will lead to the most economic growth within the Philippines for a variety of reasons. To start, the Philippines currently needs more transportation and energy services, with just 5% of the national GDP going towards investment in those sectors, according to World Bank. This lack of investment hinders the productivity and efficiency of the Philippines and stagnates their opportunity to grow. Next, infrastructure improvements will aid with productivity, as building better road systems and more efficient ports can lower the cost of transporting goods and services throughout the Philippines, which therefore lowers the price of products and improves competitiveness both domestically and globally. Infrastructure improvements will also attract foreign direct investment, as foreign nations will place more trust within the Philippines to be an effective nation to invest in due to stronger infrastructure being available. This leads to the creation of more jobs, as investors can make use of new infrastructure to increase revenue. Infrastructure improvements will also help reduce the gaps between regions of the Philippines. Rural areas currently lack the basic infrastructure necessary for efficient agriculture production, which is the main area of focus within the Philippines, and therefore investment into irrigation, storage, farming technology, and other agriculture-related infrastructure will help rapidly boost the output of crops in rural areas and improve the lives of rural residents. In conclusion, infrastructure development in the Philippines will boost the Filipino economy since it enhances productivity and creates a path forward for further economic growth and development. After providing foreign aid to Mozambique, we can see that the supply of the Mozambican medical has increased due to the foreign aid that was provided. This results in the currency rate between the Filipino peso and the Mozambican medical dropping, which now means that the medical is worth less. This lower currency exchange rate increases exports for Mozambique, as countries now have to pay less to purchase the same amount of goods as before from Mozambique. In addition to the information we have already presented, here are some other things we should know about both Mozambique and the Philippines.
When it comes to improving human capital, Mozambique should consider improving their educational services, as limited school buildings and very few qualified teachers are currently present, and therefore, if these were added, this would improve human capital within Mozambique. The Philippines should consider improving ports and other areas of infrastructure, as this will interconnect the islands of the Philippines and will necessitate more workers to help maintain the infrastructure. When it comes to the portion of people in the country that live in poverty, the Philippines is about 16.6% that are under the national poverty line, and Mozambique is at about 70% that are below the national poverty line. The nutrition and health issues for the poor in these LDCs are that many in Mozambique deal with malnutrition, diseases such as HIV, limited healthcare support, and waterborne diseases due to poor sanitation. In the Philippines, people in the Philippines tend to eat from mainly one food source and do not have a diversity of nutrients. There are also very few hospitals in the Philippines that are able to treat diseases. As for banks in the countries, Mozambique's banks are both publicly owned and privately owned. The banking services are spread out, and about 30% of the population has an account. Within the Philippines, 56% of Filipinos have an account. Banking services are somewhat available, and they are both public and private. For foreign aid in these two countries and non-governmental organizations working in the countries, Mozambique receives about $560 million from the United States alone. Some non-governmental organizations are AMURT, WaterAid, and ActionAid. In the Philippines, they receive $184 million from the United States alone, and some non-governmental organizations are IBON, Child Hope Asia, and the Red Cross.
The Philippines should mainly prioritize fixing their ports and expanding their operations, because the lack of ports and not expanding their operations will mean they wouldn't have good trade and could not really supply exports to other countries. So by expanding their ports and their operations, this allows more exports to get out of the country. While Mozambique should focus on investing in roads, railways, and airports within the country to facilitate the movement of goods, because the current state of the roads are really bad, and with the expansion of roads, railways, and airports, this can boost trade and stimulate positive economic growth. The primary source of tax revenue for the government of Philippines and Mozambique is much of the tax money does not reach the central government at all, because tax collectors are frequently bought off and the money often does not impact public services, so corruption is clearly present in both countries. And for both countries, the rich are not taxed as equally as the rest. The status of property rights in Mozambique is that land in Mozambique is owned by the state and cannot be sold at all, mortgaged, or charged to citizens. Furthermore, in order to qualify for occupation and access of the land and property, you have to be a Mozambique national. So if you're a foreigner or an immigrant, you can't have land in Mozambique or can't have access of land. In order to occupy land, if you're not a national, you have to prove residence for an extended period of time as well as a purpose for the occupation. So, like I just said, if you're a foreigner or an immigrant, you have to prove residence for an extended period of time. While the Philippines, they are investing in real estate which can be really rewarding and profitable, since it is an option for investments called rights-only property. These properties, which foreigners cannot legally own due to land ownership restrictions, offer an affordable alternative for investors. Income inequality exists in both countries. So the Philippines, the top 1% of earners together capture 17% of national income, with only 14% being shared by the bottom 50%. And they have a Gini coefficient of 42.3% in 2018. And the Philippines had one of the highest rates of income inequality in East Asia. And the Mozambique, the mean share of the lowest 20% of the population is only 5.2% of total income, while the mean share of the top 20% is about 51.5%. The informal market in the Philippines is really large because it makes up almost 40 to 50% of the GDP. At times it could be good because it provides job and livelihoods for a lot of people, particularly in their rural areas. But even though it contributes to the economy in that way, it also creates problems like tax evasion and bad working conditions and like corruption. And for the Mozambique, the informal market is also really substantial, and like Philippines, it also provides jobs and livelihoods, but it also creates problems like tax evasion and bad working conditions. And to what extent are the governments of both these countries stable? I would say the stability of the government of Philippines fluctuates due to various factors like political unrest and corruption. Short-term instability can cause uncertainty among investors and slow economic growth, while long-term instability may push away investment and hinder economic growth. And for the Mozambique, government stability can be affected by various factors, like I said, political unrest, corruption, and natural disasters. Short term would also be the same, since it discourages investment and slows growth. And long term, also like Philippines, it pushes away investment and hinders economic growth. Corruption is a problem in both countries. So for corruption in the Philippines basically kills economic growth by deterring investment and fostering inefficiency and market distortion. To address this, the country has tried to strengthen its anti-corruption laws, enhance transparency, and empower citizens through civic engagement. But corruption is pretty much you can't really take it away because there's people, and people are willing to get corrupt for money and things like that. And for Mozambique, corruption in Mozambique also kills economic growth. So it's basically the same as Philippines, and they're trying to do the same thing, but it's pretty tough to get rid of corruption.
Okay, so I'm first going to go over the DEP targets and goals for Mozambique and the Philippines. So let's first look at the Philippines. The Philippines, is a country that exists. So first goal, which is to eradicate poverty and hunger. Now, eradication of poverty and hunger is obviously not actually possible completely, but the poverty has been declining in the Philippines since 1992. Poverty levels have registered at about 25% in 2012, and the UN is anticipating that the poverty rate is going to fall by another 3% in the early part of 2013. As for the hunger levels, the proportion of the Philippines who can afford to eat adequate food dropped from 12% to 10%, so that's good. That's about a 2% decrease. Both of these figures show that the Philippines is progressing towards a society with less poverty and less hunger, even if complete eradication is impossible. So let's now look at primary education. So the Philippines has access to primary education to some extent, and it has been on the rise. 14.5 million children were enrolled in primary school in 2012, with over 90% being enrolled in public schooling. Despite the increase in enrollment, the quality of education is still suffering. It doesn't matter if everyone's going to school if the school sucks, right? So the government is working on a K to 12 program that will aim to place the Philippines on a path towards a better education by investing more in the public sector to increase the equity of the education available to students who pursue public education. So now let's look at female empowerment. Female empowerment in the Philippines. Female empowerment has been achieved, in a lot of ways. In education, national education data shows that more girls are actually enrolled and maintaining participation in school than boys. So much for equality, am I right? With more females in higher education than males. That's definitely good. We don't need males to be in school at all. In fact, we ought to just make them suffer. That's what I think. The government is still dominated by men, but the female participation has grown, with the Philippines having more female senators than their incumbent vice, and they also talk about their incumbent vice president being a woman, much like ours. I don't like Kamala Harris. She's bad. Anyways, so on to child mortality, not morality. I don't know about their morality. Maybe they're good people, maybe they're bad people, but the mortality. So in the Philippines, the target for achieving lower child mortality by 2015 is actually on track. The number of deaths prior to 2005 has decreased by 32 per 1,000 to 201, which is 30 per 1,000. The newborn death rate has also fallen, with the rate going from 18 deaths per 1,000 births in 1993 to 14 deaths per 1,000 in 2012. So now maternal health. The Philippines has seen a decrease in maternal mortality rate, with going from 209 per 1,000 to 180 per 1,000 in 2006. The maternal mortality rate has increased, however, in 2011, which indicates that this goal is not being properly met, and the UN is still hopeful that this is not a significant increase, therefore it'll start going back down. But there is not a lot of proof of that, so they need to increase their attention and investment towards that. Now let's look at diseases. The number of HIV infections in the Philippines has doubled from 2,349 in 2011 to 4,814 in 2013. So they're well on track to combating disease, as HIV is one of the primary concerns. And now onto environmental sustainability. Now it's important to understand that environmental sustainability is kind of a first world problem. It's not something that a lot of developing countries should really be focusing on, because it doesn't really matter if the ice caps are melting if children are starving. But the proportion of Philippine land that is forested fell from 4%, fell by 4% from 2003 to 2013. So there is definitely some growth there. And then on to global partnerships, which is a very, very important thing for their economy. The Philippines has actually enhanced its trade agreements, increasing the productivity and efficiency of the nation. And the Philippines has enticed FDI, with the value going from 1.96 billion in 2009 to 2.8 billion in 2008, and trade has increased as well as employment opportunity. Okay, that was a lot. Now on to Mozambique. So in terms of eradicating poverty and hunger, located in the southeast, Mozambique is a low-income, food deficit country with a lot of rural populace. It is ranked 185 out of 191 countries for the Human Development Index. So when it comes to their actual food, the Mozambique has actually achieved one of its goals, which was to halve the number of hungry people that could not afford to eat at all. However, 93% of the population remains below the poverty line. However, that's the American poverty line, not the American poverty. That's a global rate, which isn't indicative of what it's actually like. So it's not as bad as it sounds. And when it comes to universal primary education, Mozambique is facing a learning crisis. So there's really not very many people who are getting education past the age of 10. And it's estimated that 89% of the population has a below grade school education. However, the primary school completion rate was at 61% in 2020, and it increased by 5% from the year prior. Now on to female empowerment. When it comes to Mozambique, it ranked 181st out of 188 in terms of women's rights, which is quite low. However, when we look at the actual statistics, the government oversees gender issues by providing some in-depth coverage when it comes to HIV and specifically in girls. it's down by about 11% as opposed to 2013. So now let's look at child mortality. The 2010 country reports use something called the MDG index, which for Mozambique noted that there was great geographical differences for the under 5 mortality, with the urban areas having significantly higher. However, the rural areas have very little access to proper health care, which means that their rate is about 147 deaths per 1,000 live births, which is pretty bad. However, it is still improving, and it is down to 108 per 1,000 as of last year. So let's look at at combating disease. Mozambique has made great strides in reducing mortality rates and improving access to primary health care in the past 2 decades. And the country's health outcomes are much better than they were. In 2015, over half the deaths were associated with maternal deaths, and malaria still contributes to over a third of deaths among children. However, Mozambique has increased the number of trained and active community health workers from 1,000 to 8,300 from 2018 to 2022. Now into environmental sustainability. Environmental sustainability is a very large concern for many of them, I bet, which is, So Mozambique's contributions to global gas emissions are pretty minimal at around 0.21%. And is one of the countries that is most vulnerable to climate change due to its geographic location. So in the northern gas-rich provinces, the climate change impacts could drive an additional 1.6 million people into poverty. So it's very important that they start investing in that because they have a legitimate concern, from my understanding. And then on to global partnerships. The World Bank Group endorsed a new country partnership framework to support Mozambique with the goal of the CPF to support the Mozambique's progress towards a greener, more resilient, and inclusive development, which is supposed to have a lot of economic benefits for Mozambique, and it is going to be achieved by setting the foundations for transition and economic growth models, which is going to generate more jobs to keep the country more productive and more educated than it has in the past. It's also a part of some African organizations which have definitely given the country a lot of growth. So they're definitely starting to work on that goal, and they're getting towards it. And it's also important to note that there's not very many sanctions on Mozambique really at all. So that's good. So that's all of the kind of the aspects of the development and the targets. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Bye.